Jack didn't sleep that night. He sat in the glow of his laptop, replaying the audio until he had every syllable memorized. The voice wasn't clear enough for a courtroom, not yet, but it was enough for him. He recognized Karen's tone, that soft condescension, laced with smug confidence. The part that struck him hardest wasn't the trespassing or the manipulation, it was how casual it all sounded. Like planting false evidence against a neighbor was just another item on her to-do list, right after arrange mums for front porch and send late fee letters. The next morning, the trellis sat in the exact place it always had, its vines climbing lazily toward a sun that didn't care. Jack stood on his back porch, staring at it, wondering how something so innocent had become a weapon in Karen's hands. The whole yard felt tainted now, like a stage in a play he hadn't auditioned for. He poured himself coffee, black and bitter, and opened his inbox. Another message from the HOA. This one was a formal second notice, escalating his violations and warning that a fine of $250 would be levied if the structure wasn't removed within 72 hours. There was also a new photo attached. This time, it was clearer. A daytime image, though the shadows didn't match the angle of the sun on that side of his house. He opened the timestamp metadata. Something was off. The photo claimed to have been taken at 3:15 p.m., but Jack had been outside at that time, he remembered. Clearly because he'd been watering the petunias, and the hose had burst open at exactly 3:10. He even had footage of himself swearing and scrambling to shut the water off. The trellis was behind him the entire time. He found the clip, isolated it, and paused the screen at 3:15. The trellis was there, unchanged, and no one else was visible in the shot. No one taking photos. No Karen, nothing. Which meant the picture in the HOA's file hadn't been taken when they claimed it. Had the evidence was being fabricated. Jack felt the knot in his stomach shift into something sharper rage, maybe. Not loud, shouting rage. This was something quieter, more dangerous. The kind of anger that made men sharpen tools, that made them read every line of the HOA's bylaws word for word in a dark room at 2 a.m. He printed out every violation notice, created folders, backed up his footage to 2 external drives and a cloud service for the first time in years. His military training came back to him, not the combat, but the discipline, the need for a chain of proof, the importance of silence. Across the street, Karen's blinds opened just a sliver. Jack caught the faintest movement behind them. Watching, measuring. She thought she'd already won, that she'd buried him in bureaucracy, in paranoia, in shame. But Jack had one thing she didn't know about. He was recording everything. Not just video, but audio. Not just from the camera on the porch, but from a second microphone inside the porch light itself. One she couldn't possibly see. He'd never planned to use it. It had been a project, something to do after the funeral, a way to keep busy. But now it felt like a loaded weapon. And if Karen thought she could destroy him with lies, then she had no idea what truth was capable of. He sat back, folded his arms, and stared at the blinking blue light. This war had already started, and Jack had just stopped playing defense. 3 days later, Jack found his driveway sprayed with something that smelled faintly of ammonia and bleach. The concrete was stained in patches, ugly blotches, like someone had tried to scrub off graffiti that hadn't been there. There was no note, no signature, just the mess, and the implication. You're being watched. He checked the recordings first. No luck. The camera covering the driveway had glitched out around 3 a.m., something he hadn't seen happen before. Power? Surge maybe, or something more deliberate. Jack stared at the corrupted footage, lips tight. He knew Karen didn't act alone. She was too calculated to get her own hands dirty. She'd have helped someone willing to sneak around at night while she kept her HOA fingerprints clean. He didn't have to wait long to find out who. That afternoon, he took a slow walk to the mailbox. As he reached it, he saw Brian Langston, married, the type who trimmed his bushes twice a week and waved like a politician at every car that passed. Brian was standing in Karen's yard, holding a clipboard. Karen handed him a small stack of manila folders. She didn't see Jack watching from behind the hedge, but Brian did. Their eyes met for half a second too long before Brian looked away and pretended to examine a dead patch of grass. Jack turned back, heart thudding. He'd suspected Brian and his wife Melissa had been part of Karen's orbit, always on the guest list for HOA mixers, always parroting the property values. Gospel, but now he had a face to focus on. He waited until nightfall. Then he rewatched every clip from the week, focusing not on the obvious events, but on the little shadows that slipped through them. And there, around 2:59 a.m. the same night the driveway was defaced, a faint reflection moved past the far edge of the lawn camera, not enough to make out a face but a figure in a hoodie, tall and quick. The camera blinked, flickered, then nothing. The next day, a new notice arrived. A formal hearing had been scheduled. The HOA had received multiple corroborated complaints, and Jack was expected to appear to discuss his ongoing compliance issues. The phrasing was legalistic, smug, weaponized, Karen's style to the letter. Jack closed the envelope and walked straight to his garage. He found the small digital recorder tucked inside the toolbox drawer, the same one he'd used months ago. to capture a roofing contractor's beta downswitch tactics. It was tiny, no larger than a thumb drive, and sensitive enough to pick up whispers through a wall. That night, Jack walked across the street just after sunset. The HOA clubhouse wasn't far, just a short loop around the corner and down past the retention pond. He'd learned the meeting schedule months ago. Karen always held private strategy talks with select board members there on Tuesdays. He slipped the recorder under the ledge of the clubhouse's outer window and walked away without a backward glance. The next morning, he retrieved it. His hands shook slightly as he hit play. The sound was fuzzy at first, chairs scraping, paper shuffling. Then Karen's voice came through, distinct and venomous. "He's stubborn, keeps denying everything, but I've got enough to bury him." Melissa's ready to say she saw him scream at her kid. Doesn't matter if it's true. It's about perception. Someone laughed. Brian? Maybe. And once the board hears that, he's out. We've got cuz. Jack stared at the recorder. This wasn't just an HOA vendetta. This was a setup, a full-blown operation to harass him, smear him, and force him out. But now he had voices, proof, conspiracy, and Karen had no idea. He smiled. For the first time in days, they wanted a hearing. He'd give them a performance they'd never forget. By the time the clubhouse hearing loomed, Jack had transformed his living room into a tactical operations center. Evidence was sorted, labeled, and copied across 3 flash drives, a cloud archive, and 2 encrypted SD cards taped beneath his desk drawer just in case Karen thought to get creative with more than just lies. The recorder had captured every scheming word spoken in that closed-door meeting. Jack had played it back until Karen's voice was etched into the back of his mind like a ghost, cold, calculating, amused at how easy it had become to turn the neighborhood against one man. But something still didn't sit right. The Facebook posts were bothering him. Dozens of local neighbors, some he'd never spoken to, were suddenly concerned about his behavior. A post from Jessica H. claimed he stared into people's windows at night. Another, from Corey M., described how Jack had shouted at a group of kids who were just biking past. He recognized none of these names, and the details were suspiciously vague. Curious, Jack started checking profile photos, comments, and metadata. Then he saw it. Jessica H. had only 4 friends. Her photo was a stock image. He reverse searched it and found it was a model from a curtain advertisement. Corey M. had no profile history before April. The writing styles in both posts were eerily similar, down to their choice of M dashes. Karen hadn't just falsified complaints, she had created fake people. Jack leaned back in his chair, stunned. This wasn't just harassment, it was character assassination. A slow, carefully crafted digital gallows. But he wasn't the same man who used to ignore confrontation and quietly absorb the damage. Not anymore. He printed screenshots, circled usernames, and linked them with red marker to key quotes from Karen's clubhouse recordings. With each sheet he taped to his wall, the pattern became clearer. This wasn't a neighbor feud. This was a hostile campaign, and Karen had been building it for months. Jack was simply her most stubborn target. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday at 6 p.m. sharp, in the Oakmere Lakes clubhouse, a polished little room with faux wood floors and pastel art. Jack had been inside twice, once for a landscaping vote, and once for a holiday cookie exchange. His wife had forced him to attend years ago. He arrived 10 minutes early in a plain black sweater and jeans, no folders in hand, just a small flash drive in his pocket and a printed HOA bylaw booklet tucked under his arm. Inside, Karen sat at the head of the board table, flanked by Brian, Melissa, and a woman named Renea, another HOA loyalist who'd once fined a neighbor for leaving Halloween pumpkins out until November 2nd. They all wore polite smiles. Sharks in a fishbowl. Karen opened with her usual warm greeting, welcoming Jack to this important process. Her tone was syrupy sweet, the way someone might talk to a child or a senile relative. Jack sat, said nothing, waited. Karen launched into her accusations like a seasoned prosecutor. She read aloud statements, presented the same fake photos, and referenced to the now deleted posts from the phony Facebook accounts. Then she asked, with theatrical concern, "Mr. Denvers, do you have anything you wish to say in your defense?" Jack reached into his pocket, pulled out the flash drive, and calmly placed it on the table. "I do, but I'd prefer if we all listened to it instead." Karen's smile froze. Melissa shifted. Brian suddenly found the tabletop very interesting. "I think," Jack continued, "you'll recognize the voices. Especially the part about burying me, and how perception is more important than truth." Silence collapsed around the room like a vacuum. Karen's fingers twitched near her water bottle. A single bead of sweat formed at her hairline. Jack looked each of them in the eye. He didn't need to raise his voice. The truth was loud enough. Karen didn't reach for the flash drive. She stared at it as if it were a bomb she hadn't expected to see until it was too late. Jack said nothing more. He simply folded his arms and waited. The air inside the clubhouse felt heavier now. A silent storm was gathering, and everyone in the room knew it. It was Brian who finally moved. He shifted in his seat, glanced sideways at Karen, and then leaned forward. "I think, if Mr. Denvers has relevant evidence, we should hear it." Karen's head snapped toward him so quickly, it was nearly audible. Her eyes narrowed. Brian avoided her gaze. Jack slid the drive across the table. You'll need a laptop, or I can play it from my phone if you'd prefer. I don't think, Karen began, but Melissa cut in. No, if he has recordings, and this is a formal proceeding, then it's part of the record. Karen went still. Jack's phone was already in his hand. He tapped the screen, scrolled, and hit play. The speakerphone wasn't loud, but in the sterile silence of the clubhouse, every word was as sharp as a blade. He's stubborn, keeps denying everything, but I've got enough to bury him. Karen's voice filled the room. Melissa's ready to say she saw him scream at her kid. Doesn't matter if it's true. It's about perception. Brian looked down. Melissa went pale. Jack paused the clip. That was recorded Tuesday evening. I left a recorder by the clubhouse window. You said that? All of you were there. Karen's jaw clenched. That's illegal. No, it isn't. I recorded it from a public sidewalk. Your voices were clearly audible through an open window. The law's very clear. Reasonable expectation of privacy doesn't apply in that. Casey opened the bylaw booklet and placed a printed statute on the table. And here's your HOAS policy on procedural fairness. It requires impartial review, which means fabricating complaints from board members or encouraging others to is a violation of your own governance. No one spoke. Jack continued, calm and methodical. I have more metadata on the photos that prove they were doctored. Fake Facebook accounts created with stock images and no mutual connections to any actual residents. All of them created within 2 weeks of each other. All of them posting identical phrasing. He turned to Karen. The only real question is whether this was a personal vendetta or part of a pattern. Karen stood abruptly. This hearing is adjourned. We'll reschedule pending legal review. Jack smiled. No, I don't think so. You called this hearing. I showed up, and I have evidence that you and your allies violated multiple HOA codes. I've already forwarded it to an attorney, along with the recordings, and to a local journalist who covers HOA corruption. I'm not asking you to listen. I'm telling you this isn't going away. Renee, silent until now, leaned forward. You sent this to the press? Jack turned to her. People have the right to know when they're being manipulated, when their neighborhood is being ruled by someone willing to create lies out of thin air just to drive someone out. Karen's voice cracked for the first time. This is slander. You'll regret this. No, Jack said, rising. You will. The door creaked open behind him. A few residents invited to observe the hearing had entered quietly during the confrontation. They had heard it all. A woman whispered something to her husband. Another man pulled out his phone and started recording. Karen looked at them, then at Jack. And for the first time since she became HOA president, she looked cornered. The next morning, Oakmere Lakes was buzzing like a hornet's nest. Jack didn't need to check social media to know it. Neighbors lingered longer on sidewalks, whispered at the mailbox, and stole sideways glances at his home, as if he were suddenly radioactive. He had gone from the quiet widower to the man who had outmaneuvered Karen Elridge, and the story was spreading fast. Someone had leaked the audio recording. It wasn't Jack. He'd only sent it to his attorney and a local real estate watchdog. But by noon, it was floating through private community threads and WhatsApp groups, clipped into bite-sized quotes. Doesn't matter if it's true. It's about perception. Karen had gone silent. Her usual morning ritual, watering her lawn with perfect choreography while waving to passersby, was replaced with drawn blinds and a driveway empty of her pearl-white SUV. Jack suspected she was holed up inside, plotting, but something had shifted. The performance was over. Now she was just another neighbor, afraid to be seen. At 2 o'clock, Jack received an email from the HOA's vice president, Lenora Pratt. It was brief and unusually formal. Mr. Denvers, the board acknowledges the evidence you presented and is currently reviewing all complaints involving your property. All enforcement actions are hereby paused pending further investigation. Please allow 7 to 10 business days for a formal statement. He leaned back in his chair and read it twice. Paused, not dropped. A careful choice of words. Lenora was playing defense, now trying to buy time, maybe figure out how deep this went. But Jack wasn't done. He walked the block just before sunset, head high, steady pace. He didn't smile, didn't wave. He just looked at every house, every porch, every neighbor who suddenly avoided eye contact. At the far end of the cul-de-sac, Brian was rolling his garbage bin to the curb. Jack slowed slightly, then stopped. Evening, Jack said evenly. Brian hesitated, then gave a weak nod. Hey, Jack looked at him. You've got a kid, don't you? Brian shifted uncomfortably. Yeah, Lily. She's 6. Jack nodded slowly. Then you should be ashamed of yourself. He turned to walk away. Wait, Brian said, voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't supposed to go that far. Karen just said she said you'd been flagged before. Said she had documentation. I thought it was real. She threatened you. Jack asked without turning. Brian hesitated again. No, not directly. But when she wants something, it's easier to say yes than no. Jack kept walking. As he passed Melissa standing on their front step, their eyes met. She looked older somehow. Not tired, but stripped. A woman whose illusion of control had shattered and left only skin behind. Back at home, Jack poured himself a glass of water, stared at the trellis in the fading light, and tried to feel peace. But something was still wrong. This wasn't just about him. Any more if Karen had gone that far for a petty grudge, how many others had she steamrolled under policies, manipulated fines, whispered lies? How many elderly homeowners had quietly sold their homes after phantom violations drained their savings? How many complaints were fabricated to serve personal vendettas, masked as neighborhood concerns? The truth was, Jack had uncovered more than a campaign against himself. He had exposed a system, and systems don't go down easy, not without a fight. The storm hadn't passed. It had only shifted. Jack found that out 3 days later, when an envelope slid under his front door. No stamp, no return address. Just a single folded paper inside, with 6 words typed dead center. You're not safe. Stop digging now. There were no fingerprints. The paper smelled faintly of printer, toner, and garden mulch, as if someone had taken great care to make it seem untraceable. Jack stared at it for a long minute, then turned toward the front window. No cars moved. No neighbors stood watching, but someone had been close enough, brave enough, or desperate enough to walk up to his porch and issue a warning. He tucked the paper into a drawer and locked it without flinching. If this was meant to scare him off, it was too late. He'd spent the past 2 nights reviewing archived HOA meeting minutes, enforcement logs, and property sales records. The deeper he went, the more disturbing the pattern became. Over the past 2 years, 15 homeowners had either sold at a loss or left after multiple fines and compliance hearings. Most of them were either retirees on fixed incomes or single parents. Some had received notices identical in structure to his mysterious complaints with no named witnesses, blurry photos, and threats of escalating penalties. But the most damning clue came from a forgotten PDF buried in the HOA's digital newsletter archive. A thank you note from Karen to a local real estate investor for his continuing commitment to Oakmere property values. The name was familiar. Jack had seen it before, on one of the for sale signs that popped up like tombstones after each homeowner vanished. Derek S. Camden, Realty. Jack dug deeper. The same agency had purchased 5 of the homes foreclosed after HOA liens were imposed, and in every one of those cases, the violations that triggered the liens started with anonymous complaints, signed off by Karen Elridge. The HOA wasn't just a governing body, it was a machine, a funnel, a pressure chamber designed to break vulnerable homeowners and convert their losses into profit. Karen wasn't the only one behind it. She was the face, the mouthpiece. But someone else was feeding her script. Jack's phone buzzed. A blocked number. He let it go to voicemail. Seconds later, another buzz. Then another. The third message played automatically. He listened as a man's voice, flat, careful, spoke. You think you found something? You haven't. Whatever you've collected is circumstantial. Don't push this. Walk away now, and this ends quietly. Keep going, and I promise you'll wish you hadn't. Click. Jack didn't move for a long time. Not out of fear, but realization. This had grown larger than he imagined. Larger than Karen. This was a business model dressed in homeowner regulations, a network that weaponized bureaucracy and weaponized fear. But whoever had made that call had underestimated him. He didn't scare easy. The doorbell rang. He opened it to find Lenora Pratt, the vice president of the HOA, standing nervously on his porch. She looked like she hadn't slept. In her hand was a folder thin, with edges worn and a sticky note attached. I need to show you something, she said, but you can't tell anyone we spoke. Jack stepped aside. Lenora walked in, looking over her shoulder before the door closed. I've been on the board for 6 years, she said quietly, and I think it's time someone finally took her down. Jack stared at the folder in her hands, and for the first time since this began, he realized he wasn't alone. Lenora's hands trembled as she slid the folder across Jack's table. Inside were documents, copies of internal emails, altered violation records, and something Jack hadn't expected, bank statements. He scanned the first few pages quickly, heart ticking faster with each line. A quarterly HOA disbursement over $9,000 marked as a property compliance enforcement allocation. But the payee wasn't a maintenance company or contractor, it was Camden Realty. It started about a year ago, Lenora whispered, eyes darting toward the front window. Karen pitched it as a way to stabilize values, said we could quietly ease out problematic homeowners and bring in higher standards. I didn't know how far it went until I saw the money trail. Jack looked at her, studying her. Expression, guilt, fear, exhaustion, it was all there. But beneath that, something else. Resolve. She funneled HOA funds to Camden, under the table. Lenora continued. In return, they bought the foreclosed properties, flipped them, rented them out to investors. That's why your street's been changing so fast. Jack leaned back, the puzzle pieces finally locking into place, and the fake violations. She wrote most of them. Sometimes she used a template, changed the names. Melissa and Brian helped with that. They owed her favors. I think Camden had leverage on Brian. He nearly lost his job last fall. Karen kept that quiet in exchange for cooperation. Jack stood, the weight of the last few weeks settling on his shoulders in full. Why come to me now? Lenora looked away. Because I saw what she did to you, and because I know I'm next. She's already replaced half the board. Anyone who asks questions ends up voted out or publicly shamed. I've seen the fake accounts she uses. I didn't know at first, but I know now, and I'm done being scared of her. Jack felt something shift finally. A crack in the dam. Can I keep this? He asked, tapping the folder. I made copies, she said. Use whatever you need, but be careful. If she knows I spoke to you, she'll try to bury us both. As if summoned by the very mention of her, Karen reappeared the next morning, her SUV parked crookedly in front of her house, engine idling while she stormed up her walkway with a phone clutched tightly to her ear. Jack watched through his blinds. She was pacing now, yelling into the receiver, her composure gone. Whatever mask she wore at HOA meetings had cracked. Karen was unraveling. That same afternoon, a motion to remove her as president quietly appeared on the HOA's internal portal. Lenora had filed it. 3 hours later, Jack's power went out. He stepped outside, checked the neighbor's lights. Everyone else still had power. His breaker box hadn't tripped. He turned toward the street hand, saw a small figure dart behind Karen's mailbox. Jack didn't chase. He went back inside and turned on the portable recorder he now kept with him at all times. 10 minutes later, a stone hit his window. No note this time, just a message delivered the old-fashioned way. We're not finished. Karen had gone feral. She knew she was losing, and cornered people don't retreat, they attack. Jack stayed up that night, loading documents, audio, and the full report into one single packet. When he finished, he pressed send to the state's HOA Oversight Division, a local news channel, and a civil rights attorney who had taken down a corrupt board 2 towns over. The silence after was electric. If Karen wanted a war, tomorrow the world would finally see the battlefield. The morning sun filtered weakly through Jack's window as he awoke to the familiar buzz of his phone. Notifications flooded the screen. Messages from neighbors, news outlets, the attorney's office, and even a few from Karen's former allies. The scandal was breaking wide open. Oakmere Lakes was no longer the quiet enclave it had pretended to be. Overnight, Jack had become a symbol not just of resistance, but of truth. The recordings, the documents, the proof of it now in the hands of people who could make a difference. By mid-morning, the HOA board convened an emergency meeting, but this time, the room was packed with residents, reporters, and legal counsel. Cameras rolled, phones recorded, and the community demanded answers. Karen sat alone at the end of the table, her face a mask of defiance and exhaustion. She tried to speak, but the weight of evidence was a tidal wave. One by one, former board members testified about the payoffs, the false complaints, and the manipulation. Brian and Melissa, now remorseful, admitted their roles and offered to cooperate. Fully, Lenora stood beside Jack, no longer timid, but fierce and resolute. This board failed its community, she declared. We allowed fear and greed to poison trust. Today, we take the first steps to rebuild. Within hours, Karen was stripped of her presidency and suspended from all HOA activities pending further investigation. The state's HOA Oversight Division launched a formal inquiry, and the attorney initiated a civil suit to recover damages for affected homeowners. But the biggest surprise came later that evening. Jack's phone rang unknown. Number 2, he answered cautiously. Mr. Denvers, said a calm female voice. I'm Detective Elisa Moreno with the County Sheriff's Office. We've been investigating a pattern of HOA-related fraud cases across several neighborhoods, including Oakmere Lakes. Your evidence has been invaluable. Jack exhaled slowly. There's more. We've uncovered offshore accounts linked to Camden Realty executives, money laundering, bribery, and someone from your HOA board is cooperating with us right now. Jack's mind raced. Could it be Brian, Melissa? Keep your phone close. We may need you for testimony. You're part of something bigger than any of us imagined. As the call ended, Jack glanced out his window. The trellis in his backyard bloomed, untouched by months of conflict, a quiet testament to endurance. Weeks later, the neighborhood began to heal. New leadership took charge, committed to transparency and fairness. Residents volunteered for committees. Old wounds started to close. Those scars remained. Then came the last twist just when Jack thought the nightmare was over. He received a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a simple note, written in familiar handwriting. You won this round, but remember there are always shadows waiting to move in the light. Be ready. Jack smiled, a cold edge beneath it. He had learned this much. Peace in Oakmere Lakes would never come easy. But with truth on his side, he was ready for whatever came next. And so, the hidden recorder stayed on the shelf, silent, vigilant, and waiting.